The room smelled of old paper and furniture polish, a faint, cloying scent that clung to the back of Alara's throat. She sat in a leather chair that was too big for her. It sighed every time she shifted her weight, a sound that felt like a judgment. Across the vast mahogany desk, a man named Mr. Albright shuffled papers. He had a kind, tired face, but his eyes kept sliding away from hers, as if looking at her directly was a breach of some professional code of conduct. Her Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark sat beside her. They were not family, not in any way that mattered. They were the victors, sitting in the quiet aftermath of a battle Alara hadn't even known was being fought. Her grandfather, Thomas, was gone. That was the central fact. The sun had gone out of her sky, and these were the vultures picking over the cold remains. "As you can see," Mr. Albright said, his voice a dry rustle, Thomas's affairs were mostly in order. The house, located at 142 Elm Street, and the associated liquid assets in the First Community Bank, account number ending in 738, are left to his sister, Carol, and her husband, Mark. Carol made a small, theatrical sound of grief, a delicate sniffle into a pristine tissue. Alara watched her, feeling nothing. It was a performance for the lawyer, a pantomime of sorrow from a woman who had called her own brother a grease-stained relic for the last 20 years. Uncle Mark placed a thick, possessive hand on his wife's shoulder. He looked at Alara then, a brief, dismissive glance. His expression was one of mild inconvenience, as if she were a piece of furniture that needed to be dealt with before they could take possession of their new property. "And for his granddaughter, Alara," Mr. Albright continued, his gaze finally, reluctantly, settling on her. He cleared his throat. "He has left her a single asset." A silence fell in the room. It was a heavy, expectant silence. Alara could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from her aunt and uncle. This was it, the final turn of the screw. "The vehicle," the lawyer said, consulting a sheet of paper. "A 1978 Ford F-35 Custom, modified, currently registered as a commercial tow truck. License plate expired." Uncle Mark let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Big Red? He left her that pile of junk?" Carol dabbed at her dry eyes. "Oh, Mark, don't. It was his prized possession." The words were laced with a venomous sweetness. "It's a tetanus shot waiting to happen," Mark scoffed. "The appraisal came in at $400. That's scrap value, and frankly, I think they were being generous." Mr. Albright pushed a single, greasy key across the polished desk. It was attached to a simple metal ring with a worn brass tag, stamped with the word "Red." The key slid to a stop just in front of Alara's folded hands. It looked small and insignificant on the vast expanse of wood. An insult. "The vehicle is located at the Millport storage yard, off the old highway," the lawyer said quietly. "The first month's rent is paid. After that, it will be your responsibility, Alara." Responsibility. The word hung in the air. She had nothing. They had made sure of that. The small savings account her grandfather had opened for her, the one he'd put a little in every month for her birthday, for college. It had been a joint account with his name on it. It was part of the liquid assets. It was gone. She was 20 years old, aged out of a system that had never wanted her, and now dispossessed by a family that despised her. Her grandfather had been her only anchor, the only person who had ever looked at her and seen something worth keeping. And he had left her a rusted truck. She reached out and took the key. The metal was cold against her skin. It felt heavy, heavier than it should. "Well," Carol said, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "That's that then. We have so much to do. The house needs a complete overhaul. Thomas let it go so dreadfully." They didn't look at her as they left. They walked out of the office, their voices already bright with plans for renovations, for sales, for erasing every last trace of the man who had built that house with his own two hands. Alara remained in the chair. The silence in the room was different now. It was empty, hollow. "Miss," Mr. Albright said gently, "I'm sorry." She looked at him. His kindness felt like a new kind of pain. "He talked about you a lot," the lawyer added. "Whenever he came in to update his papers, he was very proud of you." Alara nodded, unable to speak. The words were a small, flickering candle in a vast darkness. She stood up. The chair sighed one last time. "He also left this," Mr. Albright said, holding out a plain manila envelope. "He was very specific. It was to be given to you only after the will was read, and only to you." She took the envelope. It contained her birth certificate, her Social Security card, and $500 bills. Crisp and clean. A life raft. Just enough to not drown immediately. She tucked the envelope into the inner pocket of her worn jacket, the key safe in her fist. She walked out of the building and into the gray afternoon. The city air felt thin and hostile. She had one small backpack of clothes at the YWCA, a cardboard box of photographs she'd managed to save from the house, and a key to a wreck. That was it. Everything she had left in the world. The bus ride was long. It pulled her away from the city, away from the life she had known, and into a landscape of rolling brown hills and forgotten little towns. With every mile, the buildings grew shorter and farther apart. The concrete gave way to cracked asphalt and then to gravel. She got off at a stop that was little more than a signpost on the side of a 2-lane highway. The air smelled different here. It smelled of dust and dry grass and something metallic, like old rain on tin. The Millport storage yard was another mile down a road that seemed to be more potholes than pavement. A high chain-link fence topped with barbed wire surrounded a sprawling lot of shipping containers, derelict boats, and sad-looking RVs. A man with a face like a road map and a stained t-shirt took her $100 bill for the deposit and pointed her toward the back corner of the lot. "Lot 7B, by the dead oak tree. Can't miss it." She walked. The gravel crunched under her worn boots. The sun was starting to dip low, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. A stray dog with one floppy ear watched her pass from the shade of a rusted trailer, but didn't bark. It seemed too tired. And then she saw it. It was worse than she had imagined. Big Red was a ghost, a skeleton of a truck. The cherry red paint was mostly gone, peeled away by sun and time to reveal large patches of angry, bubbling rust. It sat low on 4 flat, cracked tires, sinking into the dirt as if the earth were trying to reclaim it. Vines snaked up the side of the massive, custom-built towing boom, their green tendrils creeping into the workings of the winch. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks. The chrome grille was pitted and dull. It wasn't a truck. It was a monument to decay. Her uncle's laugh echoed in her ears. A pile of junk. He was right. The flicker of hope she had guarded so carefully on the long bus ride died. A cold wave of despair washed over her, so profound it made her knees weak. She had come all this way for this, for nothing, for a final, cruel joke played from beyond the grave. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. She wanted to turn around, walk back to the highway and stick out her thumb and just go. Anywhere. But there was nowhere to go. So she just stood there as the sun went down, staring at the ruin her grandfather had left her. Slowly, as if in a trance, she walked toward it. Her hand, still clutching the key, was trembling. She reached the driver's side door. The handle was stiff with rust. She had to put her shoulder into it to get it open. It groaned in protest, a long, mournful sound. The inside smelled of mildew and mice and faint, lingering oil. The bench seat was torn, the stuffing spilling out like guts. The dashboard was cracked. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. She stood there, half in, half out of the cab, breathing in the smell of failure. Then she closed the door, and it closed with a solid, deep thunk. Not a rattle, not a clang. A solid, reassuring sound of heavy steel meeting a perfectly aligned frame. She stopped. She opened the door again and closed it. Thunk. It was the sound of quality, the sound of something built right. Her eyes began to see differently. She wasn't looking at the rust anymore. She was looking at the lines of the truck. She ran her hand along the edge of the door. Under the peeling paint and the rough surface of the rust, the metal was true. No ripples, no cheap body filler. She walked to the front of the truck and looked at the massive bumper. It wasn't a factory bumper. It was custom. Made of thick plate steel, with welds so clean, and even they looked like stacked dimes. She knew those welds. She had watched him work 1,000 times, a small girl in his workshop, mesmerized by the bright blue light of his torch. This was his work. She walked to the back and looked at the towing rig. It was enormous, over-engineered, built not from hollow tubing but from solid I-beams. The winch looked powerful enough to pull a house off its foundation. The joints, the bolts, the brackets, all of it was hand-fabricated. All of it was perfect. The rust was a skin. The flat tires were a temporary inconvenience. The cracked glass could be replaced. But the bones were good. He hadn't left her a pile of junk. He had left her a project. A new feeling began to push through the despair. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something smaller, more fragile. It was curiosity, a question mark hanging in the dusty air. Why this truck? She climbed into the cab. The key felt different in her hand now. It felt like a tool. She slid it into the ignition. She knew it wouldn't start. The battery had been dead for years. But she turned it anyway. Nothing happened. No click. No groan. Just silence. Her gaze fell on the glove box. It was strange. It didn't have a latch or a keyhole. The seams where it should have opened were filled with a tiny, perfect bead of weld. It had been sealed shut. She ran her fingers over the weld. It was smooth, deliberate. Her grandfather was not a careless man. He did nothing without a reason. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. He had said that to her once, when she had dropped and shattered a ceramic mug he loved. He had patiently glued the pieces back together, filling the cracks with gold-dusted epoxy. He called it kintsugi. He said it was more beautiful for having been broken. She looked around the cab of the broken truck, at the solid door and the perfect welds and the sealed glove box. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The first night, she slept in the cab of the truck. It was cramped and uncomfortable, and the smell of decay was thick in the air. But with the doors closed, it felt safe. It felt like a fortress. The next morning, she woke up stiff and cold, but resolute. She had a purpose. First, she needed tools and knowledge. She took stock of her resources. $400, a backpack with a change of clothes, a box of photos, and a truck that didn't run. She walked the mile back to the highway, and then another 2 miles into the town of Millport. It wasn't much of a town, a single main street with a post office, a diner, a grocery store, and a handful of other shops with faded signs. One of them read, Mag's Auto and Hardware. The windows were dusty, filled with a jumble of fan belts, spark plugs, and cans of oil. It looked like it had been there since the dawn of time. A small bell chimed as she pushed the door open. The air inside was thick with the smell of rubber, oil, and old wood floors. Every surface was covered in parts. Shelves overflowed with boxes. Pegboards were dense with tools. It was a cathedral of mechanical things. Behind the counter, a woman with a shock of white hair tied back in a bandana was wiping grease from her hands with a red rag. She wore denim overalls and had eyes the color of a summer sky. They were sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "Help you?" she asked. Her voice was gravelly but not unkind. I'm not sure," Alara started, feeling foolish. "I have a truck, an old Ford. It's been sitting for a long time. I need to get it running." The woman leaned on the counter. "Old Ford, huh? What year?" 78, I think. F350. The woman's eyebrows went up. One of the good ones. What's it got in it? A 460? I don't know, Alara admitted. I haven't even gotten the hood open yet. Well, first thing you'll need is a battery and fresh gas. Old gas turns to varnish, gums up the whole system. Probably need to clean the carb, change the plugs, wires, oil. That's just for starters. She rattled it off like a grocery list. Alara's heart sank. It sounded expensive. I don't have a lot of money. The woman, Mags, studied her for a long moment. Where's this truck at? The storage yard, off the old highway. Lot 7B by the dead oak? Alara blinked. How did you know? Mags smiled, a small, knowing smile. Only 178 Ford tow truck in this county, honey. Big red. That was Thomas Harmon's truck. The name fell into the dusty air between them. He was my grandfather, Alara said, her voice barely a whisper. Mags's expression softened completely. The professional gruffness melted away, replaced by a genuine warmth that made Alara's throat tighten. I'll be damned, Mags said, shaking her head slowly. You're Thomas's girl, his Ellie. Alara could only nod. Heard he passed, Mags said, her voice gentle. I'm real sorry. He was a good man, one of the best. She came around the counter and pulled up a wooden stool. Sit down, honey. You look like you could use it. Alara sat. It felt like her legs might give out. Your grandfather, Mags began, leaning against a barrel of oil absorbent. He was a kind of genius, an artist with metal. People around here, they saw the grease under his nails and they looked down on him, his own family especially. She said the word family with a sour twist. They didn't get him. He could look at a pile of scrap and see what it wanted to be. He built that truck from 3 different wrecks. The frame from one, the cab from another. The engine he rebuilt himself, top to bottom. And that boom, that was all him. Drew it up on napkins at the diner. Said the factory ones were junk. Mags's eyes had a faraway look. He poured his heart and soul into that truck. It was his masterpiece. When his health started to go, he put it in storage. Said it was waiting. For the right person. She looked directly at Alara. Looks like the right person finally showed up. But it's in such bad shape, Alara said. The rust. Surface rust, Mags said with a wave of her hand. That's just cosmetics. Thomas used heavy-gauge steel for everything. The bones are solid. I'd bet my store on it. A new energy started to flow through Alara, chasing away the exhaustion. Mags's words were like water on parched earth. He sealed the glove box, Alara said. Welded it shut. Mags nodded slowly, a thoughtful look on her face. That sounds like him. He had his secrets. Not bad ones. Just quiet ones. Thomas always said the most important things should be kept close to the heart. Close to the heart. The phrase echoed something Alara had felt, but not understood. What do you think is inside? Alara asked. The important stuff, Mags said simply. Paperwork, maybe. The title. Maybe a letter. Thomas wasn't a big talker, but he was a writer. Kept journals for everything. She stood up and went behind the counter again. She started pulling things off the shelves. A heavy-duty battery, a set of wrenches, a can of penetrating oil, a small portable angle grinder with a cutting disc. Here, she said, placing it all on the counter. This will get you started. I can't afford all this, Alara said, her face flushing. Thomas Harmon pulled my brother's truck out of the ravine on Miller's Ridge during the '98 ice storm. In the middle of the night. Didn't charge him a dime. Said neighbors help neighbors. Consider this the first payment on a very old debt. She looked at Alara, her blue eyes firm. You can work the rest off. I can always use a hand around here. Sweeping, stocking shelves. You look like you know how to work. Tears pricked at Alara's eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I do," she said, her voice thick. "I'm a hard worker." "I know," Mags said. "You're Thomas's granddaughter." Mags helped her load the supplies into an old wheelbarrow she had out back. As Alara was about to leave, Mags stopped her. "One more thing," she said, disappearing into the back room. She returned with a brown paper bag that smelled heavenly. "Ham and cheese on rye, and an apple. Can't fix a truck on an empty stomach." Alara took the bag. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate. "Don't thank me," Mags said. "Get that truck running. It's what he would have wanted." The walk back to the storage yard was different. The wheelbarrow was heavy, but her steps were light. The world felt a little less hostile, a little more possible. She got back to the truck as the midday sun beat down. The stray dog was there again, lying in the sliver of shade cast by the boom. He lifted his head, thumped his tail once, and then laid his head back down on his paws. He didn't seem to be a stray. He seemed to be waiting. Alara ate the sandwich sitting on the rusty bumper. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. She tossed a small piece of ham to the dog, who caught it neatly, and then looked at her with an expression of profound gratitude. "I guess you're waiting too," she said to him. She decided to call him Buster. After she ate, she got to work. First, the glove box. She put on the safety glasses Mags had given her and picked up the angle grinder. It felt heavy and powerful in her hands. She took a deep breath. The instructions from Mags were clear. "Go slow. Just cut the weld, not the whole dash." She pulled the trigger. The grinder shrieked to life, a terrifying, high-pitched scream. Sparks flew, a brilliant cascade of orange against the dim interior of the cab. The smell of hot metal filled the air. She moved the spinning disc carefully along the thin line of the weld, shaving it away millimeter by millimeter. It was slow, painstaking work. Her arms started to ache. Sweat dripped down her forehead and into her eyes. But she didn't stop. This was the first step. This was the test. Finally, with a soft pop, the last of the weld gave way. She turned off the grinder. The sudden silence was deafening. Her heart was pounding. She used the tip of a screwdriver to pry the edge of the glove box door. It opened with a soft groan of protest. Inside, nestled in a bed of what looked like oilcloth, was a single object. It was a book, a thick, heavy ledger, bound in dark brown leather. It was worn at the edges, but it had been cared for. The leather was supple. She lifted it out. It was heavy. It felt important. She sat on the torn bench seat, the ledger in her lap, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was her grandfather's, neat, precise, slightly slanted block letters, written in black ink. Property of Thomas Harmon. Big red, a record. She turned the page. May, 1982, for my Ellie. You're only a baby now, but one day you'll be grown, and you might need this. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. Remember that. This book is the key. Follow the steps. The work will show you the way. Tears streamed down her face now, hot and silent. They dripped onto the page, smudging the ink slightly. He had been thinking of her, all those years ago. He had been planning for this, for her. This wasn't just a truck. It was a letter, a long, complicated, three-dimensional letter, and she was just beginning to read it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her greasy hand and turned the page. The ledger was a marvel. It was part journal, part mechanics manual, part philosophical treatise. Each entry was dated, detailing the work he had done on the truck. But woven between the technical specifications were messages for her. June 1982. Replace the stock frame with a reinforced C-channel from a Kenworth. Overkill, maybe. But a foundation has to be strong. Can't build anything that lasts on a weak foundation. Your mother is struggling, Ellie. I'm doing what I can. September 1983. Finished the engine rebuild. Board point 030 over. Balanced the crank. Every part measured, cleaned, and fitted by hand. An engine is a heart, Ellie. It has to be clean and strong to do its job. Don't ever let bitterness clog up your heart. She read for hours, completely absorbed. She learned about the custom-forged suspension brackets, the military-grade wiring harness, the dual fuel tanks he'd fabricated himself. Every modification had a purpose. Every part had a story. And with every page, a clearer picture of her grandfather emerged. Not just the quiet man who smelled of sawdust and oil, but a meticulous planner, a deep thinker, a man who loved her so fiercely it took his breath away, a man who felt misunderstood and sidelined by his own family. January 1990. Carol and Mark came by. They don't understand the truck. They see a junk pile. They see wasted money. They don't see the work. They don't see the love. Some people can only see the price of things, Ellie. They never see the value. The last entry was dated 5 years ago, August 2018. She's ready as I can make her. The battery is disconnected. The fuel is drained. She'll sleep now until you come to wake her up. The rest is up to you, Ellie. The final instructions are on the last page. Don't look ahead. Do the work first. The work will make you ready. I love you. Grandpa. She closed the ledger. The sun was low in the sky again. Buster was asleep, his side rising and falling gently. She felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She was not alone. He was here, in the ink on the pages, in the steel of the truck. The work will show you the way. Okay, she thought. Okay, let's get to work. The next day began a new rhythm. Her world shrank to the size of the storage yard, to the space occupied by the truck. The ledger became her Bible. She started with the first task listed in the section titled The Awakening. Step 1. Cleanliness is next to godliness, or at least next to a running engine. Remove all debris, nests, and junk. A clean workspace is a safe workspace. So she cleaned. She spent 2 full days just cleaning. She pulled out the rotted bench seat and the crumbling floor mats. She swept out decades of dust and mouse droppings. She evicted a family of spiders from behind the dash. She untangled the vines from the boom and scraped away the moss that had grown in the seams. It was dirty, thankless work. Her hands became raw, her nails permanently black with grime. But with every bucket of filth she hauled away, the truck felt a little more hers. She was learning its shape, its contours, its secret places. Buster watched her, a silent supervisor. She shared her meager meals with him, bread and peanut butter, apples from Mags. He was a quiet, comforting presence. After the cleaning, she moved to the next step. Step 2. Let there be light and power. The battery is your first spark. Check the cables. Clean the terminals until they shine. A good connection is everything. She followed his instructions to the letter. She used a wire brush from Mags to scrub the corrosion off the thick battery cables until the copper gleamed. She checked the grounding strap, just like the ledger told her to, making sure it had a solid, clean connection to the frame. Then, the moment of truth. She hefted the new, heavy battery Mags had given her and carefully lowered it into the tray. She attached the cables, positive first, then negative, just as he had written. When she connected the negative terminal, there was a tiny, satisfying spark. A connection. She climbed into the cab and turned the key to the accessory position. The dome light flickered on. It was a small, dim yellow light, but to Alara, it was as bright as the sun. She let out a laugh, a real, joyful sound that echoed in the small space. Progress. Small, but real. She worked at Mags's store in the afternoons, sweeping the floors, stocking the heavy shelves with oil filters and brake pads, organizing bins of nuts and bolts. Mags paid her a small wage, but more importantly, she paid her in knowledge. "See this?" Mags would say, holding up a greasy carburetor. "This is where the air and fuel mix. It's like the lungs of the engine. If it can't breathe, it can't run." Alara absorbed it all. She learned the difference between a socket and a wrench, between a gasket and a seal. She learned the language of machines. The evenings were for the truck. She'd work until the light faded, following the ledger's guide. She drained the old, sludgy oil and replaced it with fresh, clean fluid. She learned how to gap a spark plug, her fingers feeling clumsy at first, then more sure. One evening, a beat-up pickup truck pulled into the yard and stopped near her. A man with a weathered face and a tool belt slung low on his hips got out. He looked to be in his late 50s. "You're the one working on Tom's old truck," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Alara said, feeling a little wary. "Name's Sal," he said, extending a calloused hand. "I run the garage down in town. Sal's service and repair." She shook his hand. His grip was firm and dry. "Tom taught me everything I know about turning a wrench," Sal said, looking at Big Red with a fond expression. "Gave me my first job when I was a punk kid who couldn't stay out of trouble. I owe him. A lot." He looked at what she was doing. "Mags told me you were getting started, but you can't do a real restoration out here in the dirt. You need a lift. You need compressed air. You need a roof over your head." "I can't afford that," Alara said quietly. "Didn't ask you to," Sal replied. "I got an empty bay at the back of my shop. It's yours, as long as you need it. After hours, weekends, you can use my tools. All of them." Alara was stunned into silence. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Like I said," Sal said, his gaze unwavering. "I owe him, and seeing this truck run again, that's a payment I'd be happy to accept. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I could use some help sweeping up. Seems to be the going rate for getting this thing back on the road." And so, her world expanded again. The next day, Sal showed up with his own tow truck, a modern, fancy one with flashing lights, and carefully winched Big Red onto the flatbed. Buster hopped into the cab of Sal's truck as if he owned the place. Alara rode shotgun, watching her grandfather's truck follow them like a loyal, tired beast. Sal's garage was a haven. It smelled of gasoline and hot metal and hard work. It was loud and busy during the day, but at night it was her sanctuary. She moved Big Red into the back bay. Under the bright fluorescent lights, she could see the full extent of the work ahead. The rust seemed deeper, the dents more pronounced, but now she had a lift. She had air tools. She had a fighting chance. The ledger guided her. Step 5. Fuel is life. The old gas is poison. Drain the tanks. Blow out the lines. Rebuild the carburetor. It's a delicate surgery. Be patient. She spent a week on the fuel system. She drained the foul-smelling sludge from the dual tanks. She used Sal's compressor to blow air through the fuel lines, dislodging years of rust and varnish. Rebuilding the carburetor was the hardest part yet. Following the diagrams in the ledger, she carefully disassembled it, piece by tiny piece. Springs, jets, floats, and needles. She laid them out in order on a clean rag, just as her grandfather had instructed. She cleaned every part with a special solvent until the brass gleamed. Then, she put it all back together. It was like solving a puzzle in 3 dimensions. The first time, she had a spring left over. She had to take it all apart and start again. The second time, it went together perfectly. Sal checked her work. He peered at the rebuilt carburetor, whistled softly. "Kid, you got the touch. Tom had it too. A feel for how things fit together." His praise was quiet, but it filled her with a fierce pride. The day finally came to try and start the engine. Sal stood by with a fire extinguisher, just in case. Mags had closed her shop early and came over, a bag of greasy burgers in her hand. Buster sat by the open bay door, watching intently. her found family. Alara's hand was shaking as she climbed into the cab. The ledger lay open on the passenger side. Pump the gas 3 times to prime the float bowl. Turn the key. Don't flood it. She pumped the pedal. 1, 2, 3. She took a deep breath. She turned the key. The engine turned over. A slow, grinding roar. It was the sound of a deep sleeper being woken against its will. Roar. "Give it a little gas," Sal shouted. She pressed the pedal gently. "Roar, chug!" A puff of black smoke shot from the exhaust pipe. "Chug, chug, vroom." The engine caught. It stumbled for a moment, then settled into a rough, rumbling idle. It was loud. It was shaky. It was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. The whole truck vibrated with life. The floorboards hummed under her feet. She could feel the power of the big 460 V8, a sleeping giant now awake. She looked at Sal. He was grinning from ear to ear. Mags was clapping her hands together, a huge smile on her face. She had done it. She and her grandfather had done it. The truck was alive. With the engine running, the project gained momentum. It became a landmark in the small town. People would stop by Sal's garage in the evenings to see the progress on Tom Harmon's old rig. They brought stories. An old farmer named Hank stopped by. "Your granddad towed my tractor out of a mud pit back in '92. Field was flooded. He wouldn't take a penny. Said my corn fed half the town, and that was payment enough." He left a basket of fresh tomatoes on the workbench. A woman named Mrs. Gable, who ran the local library, brought a stack of old hot rod magazines. "Thomas used to come in and read these for hours," she said, her eyes twinkling. "He always had a sketchbook with him. Said he was getting ideas." An electrician, a quiet man named Frank, spent a Saturday helping her rewire the entire truck. He showed her how to solder connections, how to use heat shrink tubing, how to make a wiring harness that was clean and safe. "Tom helped me wire my first house when I was just starting out," Frank said, stripping a wire with practiced ease. "Taught me to do it right, or don't do it at all. This truck is the same. Every wire has a purpose, no shortcuts." The community was rebuilding the truck with her. But more than that, they were rebuilding her grandfather's memory. They were painting a portrait of him, brushstroke by brushstroke, story by story. She was learning about him not just as her grandfather, but as a pillar of the town, a quiet force for good that had touched so many lives. The work was hard. She tackled the brakes next, a greasy, dirty job that left her hands aching. Then the suspension, wrestling with massive, rusted bolts that fought her every step of the way. She used the lift to get under the truck, a universe of steel and grease above her. She learned the landscape of the undercarriage, the geography of the transmission, the transfer case, the dual drive shafts. With each task completed, her confidence grew. She was no longer just following instructions in a book. She was beginning to understand, to feel the mechanics of it. She could diagnose a problem by its sound, trace a leak to its source. The truck was talking to her, and she was learning its language. Then came the bodywork, the part she had been dreading. The rust. Chapter 12. The skin. Rust is a cancer. It must be cut out completely. Don't just cover it up. That's a lie. And lies always show through in the end. She started with the sander, peeling away the layers of dead paint and surface corrosion. Clouds of red dust filled the bay. She wore a mask and goggles, but the dust was everywhere, in her hair, her clothes, under her fingernails. But underneath, good steel began to emerge. Solid, clean metal. The places where the rust had eaten through, however, required surgery. Following the ledger's guide, she used the angle grinder to cut out the cancerous sections of metal. She was left with jagged holes in the fenders and the door panels. "Now you learn to weld," Sal said, wheeling over his big MIG welder. He taught her how to set the wire speed and the voltage, how to prepare the metal, how to lay a bead that was strong and clean. Her first attempts were messy, full of spatter and ugly lumps. "Keep practicing," Sal encouraged her. "It's just like drawing, but with fire." She practiced on scrap metal for days, until her hands were steady and her beads were even. Then she started on the truck. She cut patches from new sheet metal, shaping them to fit the holes she had cut. She carefully tacked them in place, then welded them solid. It was a magical process. She was creating new metal, healing the wounds in the truck's skin. One evening, as she was grinding one of her new welds smooth, a car pulled up to the garage. A clean, late-model sedan that looked out of place among the working trucks. Her Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark got out. They stood in the doorway of the bay, their expressions a mixture of shock and predatory interest. They were looking at the truck, at the smooth, bare metal fenders, at the engine that now purred like a contented lion, at the new tires that Sal had gotten her at cost. They were no longer looking at a pile of junk. They were looking at an asset. "Well, well," Uncle Mark said, a greasy smile spreading across his face. "Look what you've been up to. Quite the little grease monkey, aren't you?" Alora turned off the grinder. She set it down carefully on the workbench and pulled off her safety glasses. She didn't say anything. "We were just in the area," Carol said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "We heard you were tinkering. We had no idea. It looks much better." "It's not done," Alora said. Her voice was steady, calm. It surprised her. "Mark and I have been talking," Carol continued, taking a step into the bay. "And we feel we were a bit hasty. That truck meant so much to my brother. It has sentimental value. We think it should stay in the family." "It is in the family," Alora said. "It's mine." "Now, let's not be difficult," Mark said, his tone shifting from condescending to bullying. "The will was complex. We think there may have been a misunderstanding. A lawyer could probably clear it up. Or we could just settle it right here. We'll give you $1,000 for it. That's more than double the appraisal. It's a generous offer." Alora almost laughed. $1,000 for her heart and soul, for her grandfather's legacy. Just then, Sal appeared from the main shop, wiping his hands on a rag. Mags was right behind him. She must have called him when she saw the fancy car pull up. "Everything all right here, Ellie?" Sal asked, his presence filling the space. He was shorter than Mark, but he seemed to take up twice as much room. "These folks were just leaving," Alora said, her eyes locked on her uncle. Mark sputtered. "We're not leaving. This is a family matter." "This here is my garage," Sal said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And this young lady is my employee and my friend. And that truck belongs to her. I've seen the title. It's clean and clear, in her name. So unless you've got business here, I suggest you move your car." Carol's face was a mask of fury. "You have no right. We are her family." "Family doesn't throw a kid out with nothing but the clothes on her back," Mag said from the doorway, her arms crossed. "Family doesn't steal a girl's college fund. Now get out of here before you embarrass yourselves further." Mark and Carol looked from Sal to Mags and then to Alora. They saw her standing there, covered in dust, her hands black with grease, her expression unyielding. They saw the people standing with her. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. They had come expecting to find a scared, helpless girl they could easily intimidate. They had found a woman who had built herself a fortress and an army to defend it. Mark's face turned a blotchy red. He pointed a finger at Alora. "You'll regret this," he seethed. Then they turned and scurried back to their clean car, like roaches exposed to the light. Alora watched them go. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even angry. She just felt a quiet sense of victory. She had stood her ground, on her own 2 feet, in her own space. She picked up the grinder. The work wasn't finished. A week later, another car came to the garage. This one was older, a dented Honda Civic that had seen better days. Her cousin, David, got out. He was Carol and Mark's son. He had been there in the lawyer's office, silent and uncomfortable. He stood awkwardly by the door, twisting a baseball cap in his hands. He looked thinner than she remembered, and tired. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Alara replied, pausing her work. She was applying a thin layer of body filler over one of her welds. I saw my parents the other day," he said, not meeting her eye. "They were not happy." "I imagine not," Alara said. "They kicked me out," David said, his voice flat. "We had a fight. About money. What else? They said I was a disappointment, a drain on their resources." He let out a bitter laugh. "Sounds familiar, right?" Alara just looked at him, waiting. "Look," he said, finally meeting her gaze. His eyes were full of a shame that looked genuine. "I'm sorry about what they did, what I let them do. I just stood there. I didn't say anything. I was a coward." He took a deep breath. "I don't have any money to give you. They took that too, but I know how to do body work. My dad made me work in a shop one summer. I can sand. I can help you prep for paint, if you'll let me." Alara studied him. She remembered him as a kid, before his parents' greed had poisoned everything. They used to play together at their grandfather's house. She thought of the ledger. Don't ever let bitterness clog up your heart. She thought of the broken mug, made beautiful by its repair. "Okay," she said, handing him a sanding block and a sheet of sandpaper. "Start on that fender." He looked surprised, then relieved. "Really?" "It's a big truck," she said. "I can use the help." He didn't say anything else. He just picked up the block and started to sand. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the rhythmic scratch of sandpaper on metal. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. It was a start. The bodywork took weeks. Sanding, filling, sanding again. Alara, with David's quiet help, smoothed every panel until the truck's skin was as flawless as a blank canvas. She primed the whole truck in a coat of gray, unifying the old metal and the new. It looked like a battleship, sleek and powerful. Now it was time for the final chapter in the ledger before the paint, the one she had been waiting for. The last page, the foundation. A house needs a foundation. A life needs one too. I built yours to last. The front bumper isn't just a bumper. It's a vault. The plans are on the next page. The X marks the spot. You'll need a cutting torch. Be careful. What's inside is your future. It's the real reason for all this work. Not just the truck, Ellie. You. The work was to make you ready, to make you strong enough to carry it. Her heart hammered in her chest. She turned the page. It was a detailed schematic of the massive front bumper, a complex drawing of inner chambers and reinforcing plates, and in the very center, a small, neat X. "Sal," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "I need the torch." Sal came over, took one look at the ledger, and nodded slowly. "I always wondered about this bumper," he said. "It weighs a ton. Figured Tom just overbuilt it, like he did everything else." He helped her set up the oxyacetylene torch. He lit it for her, adjusting the valves until the flame was a sharp, hissing blue cone. "Go slow," he said. "Let the heat do the work." David and Mags gathered to watch. Buster sat by Alara's feet, a warm, solid presence. She lowered the welding mask over her face. The world became dark, except for the brilliant point of the flame. She brought the torch to the spot marked X on the heavy steel bumper. The metal resisted for a moment, then began to glow cherry red, then white hot. A molten line began to form as she moved the torch, following the cut lines from the diagram. It was a large, square section in the center of the bumper. The smell of superheated steel filled the garage. Sparks rained down on the concrete floor. It was slow, intense work. She was cutting through a full inch of plate steel. Finally, the last cut was made. She turned off the torch and lifted her mask. The square section of steel glowed with residual heat. Sal handed her a pair of heavy pliers. "Let's see what the old man hid for you." She gripped the edge of the cut section and pulled. It was heavy, but it came free. She set the hot piece of steel on the floor. Inside the bumper was a hollow chamber, and inside the chamber, wrapped in thick, oil-soaked canvas, were several packages. With trembling hands, she reached in and lifted out the first one. It was heavy. She unwrapped the canvas. It wasn't gold. It wasn't cash. It was a set of hand-forged tools, wrenches, sockets, hammers, each one bearing the small, stamped initials, TH. They were beautiful, perfect tools, clearly made by a master. They felt balanced in her hand, alive, his legacy tools. She unwrapped the other packages, more tools, a complete set. And then, at the very bottom, a heavy sealed metal box. She lifted it out and set it on the workbench. It had a simple latch. She opened it. Inside there were two things. The first was bundles of old paper, bearer bonds from the 1950s and 60s. Dozens of them, crisp and perfectly preserved. They looked like artifacts from another time. She had no idea what they were worth, but they felt heavy with significance. The second was a single, sealed envelope with her name on it. Ellie. She picked it up. Her hands were shaking so much she could barely hold it. She tore it open. The letter was several pages long, written in her grandfather's neat hand. "My dearest Ellie, if you are reading this, it means you did it. You did the work. You brought her back to life. But more importantly, you brought yourself here. I'm so proud of you. There are things I need to tell you. Things I should have said long ago. But I'm a quiet man, and some words are heavy. First, about your mother. She didn't abandon you, Ellie. Never believe that. She got sick. A sickness in her mind that the doctors couldn't fix. She loved you more than anything, but she wasn't safe. She made me promise to keep you safe, to give you a good life. I did my best. And your father, he was a good boy, but weak. He couldn't handle it. He left. I don't know where he went." The words blurred through her tears. All her life, she had carried the weight of being abandoned, a weight she never even knew she could put down. The money, the bonds. It's not dirty money. Long ago, before you were born, I invented a new kind of welding rod, a flux core that burned cleaner and stronger. I sold the patent to a big company. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. I never told Carol or Mark. I knew what they were like even then. They would have burned through it like a fire through dry grass. So I saved it. I invested it. For you. It's your foundation, Ellie. A chance to build whatever life you want. You don't have to be a mechanic like me. You can go to college. You can travel. You can do anything. The tools are for your hands, but the money is for your freedom. This truck was never about the money. It was about the work. I wanted to teach you something, that you can take something broken and make it whole again, that you are strong and capable and smart, that you can build a life with your own two hands, that you are not alone. I have loved you every minute of every day. Be happy, my Ellie. Your grandpa, Thomas." She folded the letter and held it to her chest. A great, shuddering sob escaped her. It wasn't a sob of sadness. It was a sob of release, of understanding. The last piece of the puzzle falling into place. The pain of the past was not gone, but it was reframed. It was no longer a story of abandonment, but a story of love, a story of sacrifice. Sal put a heavy, comforting hand on her shoulder. Mags handed her a clean rag. David stood silently, his head bowed. Buster rested his head on her knee. She was not alone. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and looked at the truck, the gray, primered battleship waiting for its colors. "Okay," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's paint this thing." She chose the color herself, a deep, rich cherry red, the color of a perfect apple, the color of its name. Painting was the final act of transformation. She, Sal, and David spent a weekend carefully masking off the chrome and the glass. They built a makeshift paint booth of plastic sheeting. Alara handled the spray gun herself. She laid down the color in long, even strokes, watching the gray disappear under the vibrant red, coat after coat, until the finish was as deep and smooth as glass. After the color came the clear coat, which sealed the red under a brilliant, glossy shell. They let it cure for a week. When they finally pulled the masking tape and paper off, the result was breathtaking. Big Red shone under the garage lights. The chrome, which Alara had spent days polishing, gleamed against the perfect red paint. The new glass was crystal clear. The rebuilt engine was a masterpiece of clean metal and new hoses. A retired upholsterer from town, another friend of Thomas's, had helped her redo the bench seat in tough, black vinyl with red stitching. It was beautiful. The truck wasn't just restored. It was reborn. It was better than new. It was a work of art, built on a foundation of love and hard work. She used some of the money from the bonds. Mags had helped her find a banker who knew how to process them. To pay Sal for the bay, to pay for all the parts, to give David enough to get a new start. He took it, with a promise to pay it back one day. She registered the truck and got her commercial driver's license. She opened a business account. Harmon and Son Towing and Fabrication. She crossed out Son and carefully wrote Daughter above it. The final touch was a small, hand-painted sign on the driver's door. Below her new business name, she added a line. A thing isn't ruined just because it's broken. The work was done. The truck was finished. But her work was just beginning. The final scene was quiet. It was dusk. The sky was a soft gradient of pink and orange over the rolling hills of Millport. Alara was sitting on the heavy, solid running board of Big Red, which was parked in front of Sal's garage. The truck hummed with a quiet energy, even when it was off. It was a living thing. Buster lay at her feet, his head on his paws, sighing contentedly. He was home. Sal and Mags were there, sitting in old lawn chairs, sipping bottles of cold beer. They didn't talk much. There was nothing that needed to be said. The comfortable silence was a language all its own. Alara had her grandfather's letter, now worn and soft from being read so many times, tucked into the pocket of her clean work shirt. She had his tools, cleaned and oiled, arranged perfectly in a new toolbox. She looked at her hands. They were no longer the soft, uncertain hands of the girl in the lawyer's office. They were capable hands. There were calluses on her palms and a few faint scars from slips of a wrench or a hot piece of metal. But they were strong. They were her own. She had a home. It wasn't a house with 4 walls. It was a community. It was a garage that smelled of honest work. It was a big red truck that held the heart of her grandfather. The phone in the garage office rang, its sharp sound cutting through the quiet evening. Sal answered it. A moment later, he stuck his head out the door. "Ellie?" he called. "Got one for you. A family broke down out on the old highway, near the ridge. Got 2 little kids with them." Alara stood up. This was it. The reason for it all. Not the money. Not the revenge. Not even the truck itself. The work. She opened the heavy driver's door. Thunk. She slid onto the bench seat, the vinyl cool against her back. Buster hopped in the other side, ready to go. She put the key in the ignition and turned. The big engine roared to life instantly, settling into a deep, confident rumble. The sound of readiness, the sound of purpose. She flipped a switch on the dash. The amber running lights along the cab and the big towing rig flickered on, casting a warm, hopeful glow in the gathering twilight. She put the truck in gear. She was on her way to help someone, just like he would have. The legacy continued.